Oh, look, it's a Jetta. Oh, this here Jetta wagon. Get the color MFA, bruv. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how I installed this cluster color MFA in this Mark IV Jetta wagon. I have the key and we are going to turn this bad boy on. As you can see, it's beeping at me for having the door open, but it can tell me the door's open. Oh, I guess the hood's open still. Anyways, if I flip the key on ignition, Volkswagen logo. It's kind of dark, so the backlight is kind of glaring in the camera. Looks a lot better in person. But here we go, here's the color MFA. You know what, why don't I give you guys a little tour of the color MFA. So just scrolling through the stock menu, current consumption, average consumption, speed readout, average speed, time travel, all these things are actually super useful. Also, as you can see, remaining fuel 19 liters. We know exactly how much fuel to the liters is in the tank with color MFA, which is definitely one of my favorite features. Also, this screen is configurable. So you see we've got 4 values on the bottom and the park indicator. I think you can get rid of the park indicator, or you can move the 2 values up to the top and have 2 values at the bottom. Distance to empty based on your MPGs, and then boost pressure. That's cool. You get that with 1.8 Ts and TDIs. Coolant temperature, inlet temperature, basically anything that you could read in VCDS measuring blocks, you can read in color MFA. Not only that, but you can check diagnostic codes. So if I had airbag codes, I could read the faults. Or let's go here. You can see all the individual modules you'd normally see in VCDS. You can select them here. So the all-wheel drive system, your xenons, navigation, and so you can go into these modules and you can clear faults. So when I did this job, I had to take the steering wheel airbag out, and basically I did unplug the battery, but the code still triggered even though I plugged everything back in and pulled the battery before I did those steps. So I just went in, and there's no airbag light. Boom, just like that. You can adjust the screen backlight and everything. This thing still gets firmware updates. You got an eco mode, which is basically a shift light for MPG. Trip computer, so you got one trip computer and a second trip computer, and then all of these are values that you can have logged in the trip computer. So the first one is short-term trip computer, and the second one is like lifetime, long-term. And that one will record as soon as the color MFA is installed, and it'll just store that permanently. Then you have your service intervals that you can set up if you want. You can also do torque acceleration. So yeah, this measures like how much power the motor's putting out based on some VCDS calculations that you could do yourself with VCDS. This just kind of does it for you, which is super awesome. And then acceleration, obviously 0 to 60. And then you got your graphs. You can, I guess this is a shortcut, but if you go into measuring blocks for diagnostics, it takes a minute to connect to the module. And then you got your group blocks. You can take this one, you can click check, you can graph it, and then when the engine's running, when these values are changing, you can make a little graph. So that's a quick tour. In this video, I'm going to show you guys how I installed it, give you a few tips. There's a bit of information missing out there for installing these little modules that I'm going to go over in this video. That'll at least help you if you don't know what you're doing. It's quite easy to install this. I shouldn't say quite easy. It's a pain in the ass to install this, especially getting the needles synced up to the correct spots, and then, you know, routing all the wiring and everything. But if you have like 2 days to spare to make this all work, it is the best mod you can do for any Mark IV vehicle. So while I disassemble this cluster, I'm going to tell you guys that there are actually some instructions to install this color MFA. It basically tells you what points to solder on, what wires to run between the pins on the cluster and the color MFA. So I put that link in the description below. Alright, so I took some pliers to take the metal bracket off for the odometer and the clock displays. Flipped the board over, took the plastic shielding off, and we're down to the bare cluster board. So honestly, once you have the paper instructions, this is pretty straightforward, but one thing that's not straightforward is this graph here that shows the pinouts. Basically, when you work on the back side of the cluster, you're going to want to flip these so that you are soldering on to the correct point. So here I am kind of starting that process. This little tool here helped me hold the wires, and I soldered it onto the points, ran each individual wire through and cut it to length. I did this at first, but I found it was easier to cut a bunch of pre-measured lengths. For the thicker gauge wire that actually runs power and ground to the MFA board, you want to cut 3 250mm slices, and then for the rest of the smaller ones, you're going to want to cut them to about 400mm. Then you're going to want to further tailor their size point to point. So this installation video applies to a cluster that doesn't actually have an MFA board. So you're gonna wanna pay close attention to where I've soldered resistors here. The LEDs actually have to be removed, and then you place the resistor on top of the old pad. So this wire is incredibly thin. So you're gonna want wire strippers beforehand that can actually strip this wire. It's 24 AWG. Make the soldering process easier, get some non-conductive flux. Here I'm using a drill to twist the two CAN bus wires, low and high. Now before I started introducing too many wires without having both ends connected, I started to connect some of the ends to the color MFA, and then once I had that done, I basically added some more wires. Pay close attention here as well. Some of these wires you will have to solder directly to the resistor pads. For things like the brake light switch and the oil pressure light switch. You'll find this on your color MFA manual. Here I'm using some cloth tape to organize the wires. This is kind of how I routed it. I ended up being pretty neat about it. All right, here is the cluster. Time to slap it in. Okay, so this is the old stock that was removed, and this is the new one. As you can see, there's two buttons. This is for cars that didn't originally come with the little MFA display. The stocks didn't have the controls for them if you didn't have one of those displays. So you also have to pin the green connector. There's 3 of them. There's one for the up button, one for the down button, and one for the reset button. It's pins 25, 24, 23. You can look it up online. And then it goes into this stock here, and then there's a 4th one on the stock for the switch for ground. And so what I did is, it's all covered up now, but under here on the steering column, there's a little 10mm ground nut. I just made a ring and a wire and pinned it into the from the stock connector to ground, and that is probably going to work. It's this connector that I'm talking about here. So that pretty much concludes the installation for this video. One last thing to note is if you have a 2004 and up cluster with the high beam light insert with this plastic nub that sticks down, you got to be careful when you're pressing the cluster together that the color MFA display is not too high up within the cluster, because if you squish it down, it will end up cracking your display. Of course, also for the color MFA, you will have to trim your gauge faces. So just be careful with how far, if you don't have this insert, how far up you trim it, because it could end up being visible on the high beam flasher. Anyways, that concludes this video. Thank you guys for watching. See you next time.